Alright, so it looks like the French are doing what they do best, and that is protesting their government, this time in response to some neoliberal austerity measures that President Emmanuel Macron is trying to enforce in regards to their retirement benefit system. So I got a breakdown here from More Perfect Union. Obviously, this is something that we have been tracking for a while on this channel. He is essentially trying to raise the minimum retirement age from 62 to 64, and clearly, as you can see from this video here, the French people are not too happy about this. So let's just go ahead and start this thread here. They say, you might have seen that France seems kind of upset. They say there's been strikes, protests, riots. Why the outrage? Well, it started earlier this year when President Macron proposed changing the pension system, which would essentially raise the retirement age from 62 to 64. Now, keep in mind, again, this is the minimum retirement age that people could start to be eligible for some of these benefits here in the United States. We are multiple years behind the French on this issue, and in fact, even though we are behind this number that they're talking about here in the United States, we still have many Republican politicians who are trying to force the retirement age to go even higher than it already is here in the US. But we got a little video here of something that they were burning here. It looks like it's the 49.3 resolution, which was essentially the constitutional justification that Emmanuel Macron's government was trying to use to surpass some of their procedures in their legislative process in order to try to force this passage through in a pretty authoritarian way, honestly. But they give us a little bit more details here, saying that the proposal faced imminent resistance. They say just days after his government announced the plan, hundreds of thousands of people flooded the streets of cities and towns across the country, and unions called strikes that disrupted transport, schools, and other public services, all thanks to the fact that a lot of the French population is covered by some of these broader, industry-wide, in some cases, collective bargaining agreements that are put forward by large unions within this country. Again, just giving us a reminder on the power of collective organization of workers. But they say that Macron he insisted that he would alter the pension system and attempted to get it through parliament. But in January, he said, "We will do it with respect, in the spirit of dialogue and also determination and responsibility," whatever that means. I mean, it seems kind of like vapid virtue signaling there, in my opinion. But they say even as he said that, riot police were clashing with protesters in the streets of Paris, and Macron insists that in a country with an aging population where everyone receives a state pension, pension reform is the only way to keep the country system solvent. Okay, so again, pretty similar to the conversations we've been having here in the United States. They say, however, unions are arguing that the pension overhaul threatens hard-fought rights and propose a tax on the wealthy or more payroll contributions from employers to finance the pension system. Okay, so again, I know that people get annoyed when you make comparisons from, a U.S. commentator that is making comparisons to the United States because we have this America-centric approach to all foreign policy issues, but this is almost word for word the exact arguments that we are dealing with some Republicans who want to push so-called reforms to our Social Security system here in the United States, which is effectively the equivalent to their pension system that they have over there. I mean, this is the same fucking argument that we hear on a regular basis, right? Oh, the only way we could possibly continue providing these benefits to people, or some semblance of these benefits to our retirees, the only way we could do it is by slashing some of those benefits, pushing austerity on working class people who have worked their entire lives for these benefits, right? There's no way that we could potentially think about trying to tax the wealthy more or trying to tax corporations more in order to make these programs solvent, right? It must come at the expense of working class people in France or in the United States. I mean, again, we talked about some of the proposals that were put forward by Bernie Sanders, for example. All you would have to do in the United States to make Social Security solvent for the vast foreseeable future, like 100 years down the line, is simply lift the cap that millionaires and billionaires are not paying into this system because of this arbitrary cap that we have put in place in terms of contributing to this program, right? I would imagine it's a similar situation going on in France, where it's like, yeah, you have two options on the table here. You could either slash the benefits or you could raise taxes on the wealthiest people in society. They are, of course, choosing to go with the austerity approach for working class people. And so obviously people are taking to the streets and they're not having this bullshit, right? But they continue saying that in late January, the unions escalated. The CGT, a confederation of unions representing 700,000 workers, cut power to a swath of wealthy suburbs by the Orly airport outside of Paris, and they even briefly cut electricity to the Paris headquarters of the moderate CFDT union. I mean, again, I covered this on my channel in the previous video where we were talking about this issue. This is absolutely amazing. Okay, you are slashing power consumption to some of the wealthiest ghouls within your country. Simultaneously, as they point out here, they were essentially giving free power to French schools, hospitals, and low-income homes. So, I mean, again, they point out that this is Robin Hood-esque. I mean, this is like the perfect combination of something that I would love to see deployed here in the United States. Okay, you're slashing power consumption through the union power that you have accumulated over the last number of decades, slashing power consumption to the wealthy, to the elite within society, while simultaneously giving free access to that electricity to some of the people on the bottom rung of the ladder within society. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that, in my opinion, but they continue here saying that, needless to say, tensions continued to rise, and February saw multiple days of mass strikes, with estimates ranging up to 2.5 million workers on strike in a single day. Okay, this is unimaginable coming from an American commentator here. They say transportation, garbage collection, utilities, and education unions walked off the job, and this is something we have been seeing throughout these protests, is garbage is starting to accumulate on the streets of cities like Paris because these people are not showing up to work, because they're trying to stand up against some of these neoliberal austerity measures. But they say by March, unions were ready to escalate again. Workers had, by this point, held 8 days of mass protests, with millions hitting the streets. So now, crucially, some workers decided to abandon one-day strikes for a rolling, ongoing strike. Okay, so it doesn't look like this is going to be settling down anytime soon here, but they say most notably, the garbage collectors went on indefinite strike, and that means that trash started to pile up in the streets, and Reuters reported on the scene in the streets of Paris. Let's just go ahead and jump into this quick 30-second video here and check out the current situation with garbage collection in France.
Je ne comprends pas pourquoi certains quartiers ont cette chance de pouvoir avoir des compagnies privées qui vont pouvoir déblayer tout ça, alors que d'autres sont privés de cette possibilité-là. Et très honnêtement, il y a une inégalité qui est malsaine.
Okay, so that's what it's looking like, right? I mean, that's what it looks like when workers, again, exercise their collective power in order to refuse to go out and continue their labor to extract demands either from the capitalist class or the politicians who represent the capitalist class as well. But they continue here saying that then, just yesterday, Macron changed his approach. Okay, so here's where you get into the constitutionality that he has been trying to push with to get this through. They say he had been trying to get the legislation passed through the conventional process, but after massive waves of opposition in some of these, different political factions within France, you have some far-right leaders like Marine Le Pen who are using this as an opportunity to rally against Macron's coalition, and she is pushing against this austerity measure. You also obviously have unions and other forces on the left end of the spectrum who are also pushing against this. But after all of this opposition, he switched his approach, declaring that he would use Article 49.3 of the French Constitution, which is what we just saw them burning up in this first clip, right? So he decides to use this Article 49.3 of the French Constitution, and they say it enables a government to push a bill through the National Assembly without a vote. Okay, fantastic democracy that we have going on here over in France, where they can just, I guess, override the National Assembly, the people who are actually directly elected by the people of France, just override them, even though this policy measure has a tiny minority of the population actually supporting it. The last polling data I saw showed that it had 65% to 70% opposed to this specific policy adjustment, and yet they're forcing it through, not just forcing it through with other corrupt politicians, but just completely circumventing the normal political process in order to get this done. I mean, it's incredibly authoritarian, but they say it's legal, but also seen as undemocratic for obvious reasons. And they say there's a cost. Opposition lawmakers have 24 hours to file a no confidence motion against the government. Now, it turns out they actually ended up doing this, and it wasn't that successful, and it came closer than a lot of people thought. But Macron's government managed to stay in power just for the foreseeable future, for now at least. But again, he managed to hold on to his position in power. So now I wanted to show you a little bit more of what this was actually looking like on the ground. Here we have some video from the Wall Street Silver account that is pushing obviously this police clash that is going on with some of these protesters being brutalized by the French police forces. Maybe not as brutal as the U.S. police forces that we have seen over the last couple of years here in the United States. But obviously, solidarity to the people who are going out there and actually fighting against not only the police forces but also against the French government and just the general neoliberal consensus that has been baked into the political systems here in the United States and also obviously in Western European countries as well. But we've seen a lot of the outcome to some of these actions that Macron has just been insisting on pushing through. Here from Bloomberg, they say that Macron's popularity has sunk to its lowest in 4 years. Okay, so that's where we currently stand on this issue. And again, I mean, this is a fantastic democratic system that we have going on here under capitalism, right? You have economic policies that are incredibly unpopular, okay, that the vast majority of the population absolutely rejects, that they are willing to take to the streets in order to directly put themselves on the line to fight against. And yet we have governments that are circumventing the political process in order to force through these austerity measures. Why? Because they don't want to touch the vast swaths of wealth that the upper echelons within our societies are hoarding. Okay, they don't want to raise taxes on millionaires and billionaires or corporations in order to make these programs solvent. They instead want to put that burden on working class people and force them to work longer years so that they can potentially start to get access to some of these retirement benefits. I mean, it's just complete and utter nonsense. This is not what democracy looks like. This is not what an actual functioning political system looks like. And clearly, if you are listening to the French, which again, 100% solidarity to everybody who is taking to the streets to protest this specific political measure. But, at the broad scopes of everything right now, I mean, it's good to see a lot of these people who are taking to the streets to protest this. But, I mean, this is what our neoliberal economic model is going to continue to deliver. And one more point that I want to make clear on this is that similar to Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden here in the United States, Emmanuel Macron wants to pretend as if him and this neoliberal centrist coalition is the one thing that is preventing us from falling into the grips of people like Marie Le Pen or Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis here in the United States, or in other words, sort of like a very right-wing fascist, faux populist type of an agenda. They want to pretend as if they are the biggest bulwarks against that type of a movement, that they are going to be the saviors and the preventative force against fascism within the Western world per se. Okay, that's what they want to convince people of. It's utter nonsense. Okay, this type of austerity, these types of policy approaches that Emmanuel Macron and other democratic politicians here in the United States are pushing right now, that is what leads to fascism. Okay, when you create instability within your country, when you create this uncertainty within the minds of working class people, where they feel like their government, especially a liberal government, is not working at their behest and is instead working on behalf of millionaires and corporations, that is what leads to that destabilization. That is what leads to the ability for right-wing populists to, utilize the culture war, to utilize anti-immigrant, black sentiments in the case of the United States, to utilize those sentiments in order to try to use them as scapegoats to distract from their economic agenda and to achieve power. So you're not even accomplishing what is basically your main selling point, which is that you are a bulwark against more radical right-wing movements, and instead you are choosing to sacrifice working class people within your own country at the behest of millionaires and billionaires and corporations who are your actual overlords.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying